Arthur Finch sat perfectly still in the sterile waiting room, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights doing little to ease the shadow of an old worry that crossed his face. Unconsciously, his fingers traced a faded scar on the back of his hand, a physical echo of a wound that had never truly healed. At the bustling Bayview Community Clinic, Arthur Finch checked in, the receptionist's gaze barely meeting his. His name on the clipboard was a familiar ritual in a life that had settled into quiet rhythms. He observed the diverse clientele, a tapestry of weary faces, each carrying their own burdens. A sense of disconnection settled over him, a quiet resignation to his solitary existence amidst the crowd. Arthur found a seat near a stack of well-worn books, donated relics of forgotten stories. The clamor of the waiting room, the coughs and hushed conversations felt distant, a backdrop to his quiet solitude. He often sought refuge in books, a habit ingrained from decades in classrooms. His hand reached out, drawn to a dog-eared copy of Cosmic Wonders, a book on astronomy he had often recommended. A familiar ache, a quiet longing for lost connections, settled in his chest. Arthur idly flipped through the pages of Cosmic Wonders, the scent of old paper and dust, a comforting presence. His mind drifted, half listening to the announcements overhead, half lost in the intricate diagrams of nebulae and distant galaxies. Then, on a page detailing the life cycle of a star, his eyes caught something unusual. Small, precise margin notes, scribbled in a distinct, looping hand, filled the narrow white space. They were astute observations, questions that challenged the text, revealing a mind that wrestled with concepts beyond the surface. A flicker of recognition, faint but insistent, stirred within him. He had seen this handwriting before. The clinic waiting room blurred, replaced by a memory 20 years old. Young Arthur Finch, principal of Northwood High, sat behind his desk. Opposite him, a bright-eyed teenager, Leo Maxwell, leaned forward, a copy of Cosmic Wonders, open. But Principal Finch, Leo had argued, if the universe is constantly expanding, does that not imply a finite beginning and an ultimate end? Arthur remembered the sheer brilliance in Leo's eyes, the way his mind made connections others missed. An excellent question, Leo, young Arthur had replied, a genuine smile on his face. He recalled Leo's unique perspective, a memory tinged with a future sadness. Back in the present, Arthur's breath hitched. He turned the book to its inside cover, his fingers trembling slightly. There, etched in the same distinctive looping script, was a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 2 decades. Leo Maxwell. A wave of shock, cold and sharp, washed over him, followed by a familiar, sickening ache of guilt. It couldn't be a coincidence. This was Kementir Scotty Leo, the brilliant student who had vanished from Northwood High, under a cloud of unspoken tragedy. The vibrant clinic around him faded into a blur as the weight of a forgotten promise, a regret he had carried for so long, crashed down with renewed force. The worn copy of Cosmic Wonders felt surprisingly heavy in Arthur Finch's hands, not with its physical weight, but with the accumulated years of his own inaction. He had brought it home, unable to leave it behind on the clinic's communal shelf. His small apartment, usually a haven of quiet routine, now felt like a cage. He paced, the floorboards creaking a rhythm to his agitated thoughts. The book clutched to his chest like a long-lost letter. Every time his eyes fell upon Leo Maxwell's looping script in the margins, a fresh wave of fragmented memories broke over him. Talks Leo, that brilliant, troubled boy. The words on the page, once just intellectual curiosities, now felt like whispers from a ghost, haunting him with questions that had lain dormant for 2 decades. Why couldn't he let go of this book, this name? The present reality dissolved, replaced by the sterile, imposing formality of his old office at Northwood High 20 years earlier. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Young Arthur Finch, then a principal still finding his footing, sat across a polished mahogany desk from a pale, distraught Leo Maxwell. Leo's eyes, usually alight with intellectual fire, were downcast, shadowed by an unspeakable sorrow. Mr. Maxwell, the board's decision is final. A stern, disembodied voice from a speakerphone crackled, belonging to a board member whose face Arthur couldn't quite recall, only his unyielding tone. Disruption of school property. Failure to comply with regulations. The expulsion stands. Arthur remembered the knot in his stomach, the way Leo had flinched at each word. not in defiance, but in quiet, crushing despair. He'd sensed it then, a deeper, unspoken pain beneath the surface of the official charges, a silent plea for understanding. But the rules, the policies, the pressure from above, they had bound his hands, silenced his questions. He had watched Leo, a boy with a universe in his mind, accept his fate with a resignation that had always troubled Arthur. The memory was as sharp and painful as if it were yesterday, a pivotal moment he had failed to truly intervene. Back in his quiet apartment, the weight of that past moment pressed down on Arthur. He stared out his dark window, seeing his own reflection, an older, more burdened man. The book lay open on the table, Leo's handwriting a stark reminder of the brilliance he'd witnessed, the potential he'd allowed to slip away. Why didn't I push harder? The question, a persistent, corrosive whisper, echoed in the silent room. He had been a principal, a guardian of young minds, and yet, when one of his brightest stars had flickered, then vanished, he had simply let it happen. He had followed procedure, upheld policy, and in doing so had failed a student who clearly needed more than just rules. The loss of Leo Maxwell wasn't just a professional regret. It was a personal stain, a testament to a moment of inaction that had haunted him for decades, a brilliant mind lost to the shadows, a potential squandered. The next morning, Arthur's study, usually reserved for crosswords and quiet reading, transformed into a makeshift command center. He unearthed his old Rolodex, its cards yellowed with age, and began to dial numbers on his ancient rotary phone. "Hello, Mildred. Arthur Finch here. Yes, it's been a while. Listen, I'm trying to track down an old student, Leo Maxwell. Class of, well, about 20 years ago." The calls were met with polite bewilderment, vague recollections, and ultimately, dead ends. He then tried to navigate the school district's online archives, a labyrinth of outdated systems and missing files. Student privacy, the automated message stated, denying him access to anything beyond public record. Each digital roadblock, each blank stare from a former colleague intensified his frustration. He meticulously jotted down every fragment of information, no matter how small, on a pad of paper, feeling like a quiet detective, starting a search against all odds. The clock ticked, showing the slow, arduous passage of time, but his resolve only hardened. Later that day, a breakthrough, however small and unsettling, arrived. An old administrative assistant, a woman whose memory was as sharp as her tongue, finally offered a cryptic clue. "The Maxwells? Oh yes, Principal Finch, I remember them. Such a quiet family. They left town rather suddenly after Leo's expulsion. Didn't say much to anyone, just packed up and went. Quietly." The phone clicked. The line went dead, but her words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Left town quietly. Arthur felt a chill trace down his spine. It wasn't just an expulsion, it was a disappearance. What kind of trouble could have forced a family to vanish without a trace? The depth of Leo's isolation, the abrupt severance from his entire life, hit Arthur with fresh force. He picked up the Cosmic Wonders book, its familiar cover now a silent question, his pensive expression deepening. What secret were they hiding? As darkness settled outside, Arthur sat beneath the glow of a single desk lamp, the Cosmic Wonders book spread open before him. He reread every margin note, every underlined passage, searching for hidden meanings, for personal details Leo might have inadvertently left behind. Leo's youthful insights into astrophysics, his profound questions about the universe, now seemed tinged with a tragic irony. Then, one note caught his eye, scrawled next to a passage about distant nebulae. Even lost stars continue to shine, but sometimes their light never reaches us. Arthur's breath hitched. Lost stars. It wasn't just a philosophical musing. It was a lament, a metaphor for a life unmoored, for connections severed. He felt a profound, almost painful connection to the young boy who had penned those words. A boy whose brilliance was now overshadowed by an unknown sorrow. Would these hidden messages of a lost boy lead Arthur to the truth? The first light of dawn barely touched Arthur's study as he made a decisive move. He had found it. An old address for the Maxwell family, buried deep within a forgotten folder of school enrollment forms. Despite the administrative assistant's words about their quiet departure, this tangible link remained. It was a long shot, a thread from a distant past, but it was Pullman Roll's something. He pulled out a worn satchel, packing a thermos of tea, a notebook, and of course, the Cosmic Wonders book. A silent promise formed on his lips. A vow to the lost student whose words now haunted his every waking moment. A sense of purpose, long dormant, rekindled within him, pushing aside the anxiety of the unknown. The journey begins. Will an old address reveal a 20-year-old secret? Arthur's old sedan hummed along the waking streets of the city, carrying him towards a neighborhood he hadn't visited in decades. The morning commuters, lost in their own routines, paid him no mind, but for Arthur this was no ordinary drive. This was a pilgrimage, a quest for atonement. The Cosmic Wonders book lay open on the passenger seat, its pages turned to Leo's familiar notes, a silent companion on this unexpected journey. He gripped the steering wheel, a mix of hope and trepidation swirling within him. He didn't know what he would find, or if he would find anything at all. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not, would not, turn back now. A retired principal, a forgotten student, a 20-year-old mystery. Where will this path lead? A ghost of a home. Has the trail gone completely cold? Arthur Finch pulled his modest sedan to the curb, the engine sighing to a halt. Before him stood the address he'd meticulously unearthed from old-school records, 1422 Sycamore Street. But it was not a home. It was a skeleton of one. Windows were boarded up, paint peeled in long, leprous strips and weeds, aggressive and defiant, clawed at the porch. A rusted, "For Sale" sign, leaning precariously in the overgrown yard, was faded beyond legibility. Despair, cold and sharp, pierced Arthur's chest. This wasn't just an empty house. It was a testament to absence, a monument to a family that had vanished. He stood small against its decaying facade, the weight of 20 lost years pressing down. Had he truly come all this way, only to find nothing but silence and rot? What dark trouble forced a family to disappear overnight? With a heavy heart, Arthur moved on, seeking any flicker of memory in the quiet, aging neighborhood. He eventually found a small, dusty corner store, its bell jingling a welcome that felt out of place. The owner, a woman with tired eyes and a face etched with the city's history, nodded vaguely when Arthur mentioned the Maxwells. "Oh, them," she murmured, wiping the counter with a practiced slow motion. "Left town quiet-like. Real sudden. There was trouble. That bright boy, Leo. Shame." She offered no more, her gaze drifting to a shelf of canned goods, a subtle but firm wall closing off the past. Arthur sensed a deeper, untold story, a community's hushed agreement to let sleeping secrets lie. But he wouldn't. Not anymore. Searching for a ghost in the archives, will the past remain hidden? The next day found Arthur immersed in the sterile quiet of the local library's archive room. Rows of towering shelves held the city's forgotten narratives, and he was determined to find Leo Maxwell's. He squinted at microfiche, his eyes aching as he scrolled through blurry property deeds, old utility records, and fragmented census data. Each dead end, each missing file, each frustratingly vague entry chipped away at his patience, yet fueled his resolve. It was like trying to catch smoke, he thought, a life deliberately erased. But he wouldn't give up. He wouldn't let Leo remain a ghost in the city's forgotten corners. He owed him more than that. A forgotten name, a new path, the search ignites once more. Hours bled into late afternoon. Just as Arthur felt the familiar creep of despair, a faint glimmer appeared. Deep within a digitized collection of old newspaper obituaries, he found it. A notice for Leo's grandmother, Margaret Maxwell. His finger, trembling slightly, traced the faded text. And there, buried in the final paragraph, a new name, a new hope. Survived by her sister, Evelyn Reed. A gasp escaped him, soft but triumphant. Evelyn Reed. A living link. The name resonated like a chime, cutting through the static of forgotten lives. A new path had opened, a fragile thread leading him further into the labyrinth of Leo's past. From dusty archives to digital clues, the hunt for truth continues. Armed with Evelyn Reed's name, Arthur returned to his study, trading dusty archives for the unfamiliar glow of his laptop. He wasn't a man of the digital age, and the internet felt like a vast, unruly beast. He fumbled with search engines, muttering exclamations of frustration as he navigated pop-ups and irrelevant links. But his determination was unyielding. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, an old address for an Evelyn Reed in a different, quieter part of the city flickered onto the screen. He printed out a pixelated map, the noisy whir of the printer, a triumphant anthem. It was a tangible step forward, a physical manifestation of his unwavering commitment. The face-to-face, will the stranger hold the key to a lost life? The next morning, Arthur drove towards the new address, the city slowly awakening around him. The neighborhood was modest, with tree-lined streets and well-kept but unassuming houses. He gripped the steering wheel, a knot of anticipation tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just another address. It was a doorway to answers, a potential bridge to Leo. He rehearsed his words, striving for a tone that was earnest, yet not intrusive. What would Evelyn be like? Would she be open to his questions, or would she too guard the secrets of the past? He took a deep, fortifying breath as he pulled up to his small, blue house, the weight of 20 years resting on this single, hopeful knock. The modest house on the tree-lined street held its breath under the mid-morning sun. Arthur Finch, his heart a drum against his ribs, raised his hand and knocked. The sound was surprisingly loud in the quiet suburban air. After a long moment, the door opened a crack, revealing a woman framed by a mesh screen. Evelyn Reed. Her face was etched with a lifetime of quiet burdens, her eyes, sharp and wary, instantly assessing Arthur. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy, a low guard in every syllable. Arthur offered a small, earnest smile, instinctively clutching the Cosmic Wonders book. "My name is Arthur Finch, ma'am. I'm looking for information about the Maxwell family, about Leo Maxwell." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable. Fear? Suspicion? Crossing her face. "I don't know any Maxwells," she said, already moving to close the door. "You have the wrong house." The click of the latch echoed the closing of a vault. Arthur placed his foot gently against the doorframe, preventing its full closure. "Please, Mrs. Reed," he began, his voice soft but firm, infused with the weight of 2 decades of regret. "I was Leo's principal at Northwood High, many years ago. I failed him. I carry that regret with me, and I'm trying to understand what happened. To make amends." He held out the dog-eared copy of Cosmic Wonders, its worn cover a silent testament to a shared past. Evelyn hesitated, her gaze dropping from his earnest face to the book. Her eyes, still wary, scanned the title. A muscle in her jaw twitched. "What's that old thing got to do with anything?" she asked, but the edge in her voice had softened, replaced by a thread of something akin to curiosity. Arthur saw a tiny crack in her defenses, a chance. "It was his," he explained, pushing the book slightly forward. "He loved it. He wrote notes in the margins. It's a connection, Mrs. Reed, a thread to the boy he was, and, perhaps, to the man he became." Evelyn took the book, her fingers tracing the familiar, faded cover. She opened it to a random page, her eyes falling on a scribble, a question mark next to a complex astronomical theory. A ghost of a memory, perhaps. She sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "My sister, Leo's mother, after they left, she never spoke of him again. Not really. It was like a darkness fell over the family. A silence." She looked out the window, her gaze distant, lost in a past Arthur could only imagine. She just shut down, like he never existed. "It broke my heart, Arthur. Broke it all over again." Arthur listened, his empathy a silent, comforting presence. He understood, now, that the silence wasn't just about secrets. It was about pain too profound to articulate. He leaned forward, his voice a gentle murmur. encouraging her to share more of the unspoken sorrow. Evelyn's eyes, still fixed on some unseen point beyond the window, began to fill with unshed tears. "Before all that, the darkness, my sister," she struggled. "With her mind. It was a secret, you see. Kept hidden. Her episodes were getting worse." She gestured vaguely towards a faded family photograph on the mantelpiece, a younger, smiling woman, her face full of a light that was now absent from Evelyn's memory. And then Leo's father, he left, just walked away when things got too hard, said he couldn't cope, left her and Leo to fend for themselves. Arthur felt a wave of profound sorrow wash over him. The pieces of the puzzle, once so fragmented, were beginning to form a tragic picture. Leo, a brilliant young mind, had been drowning in a sea of unspoken illness and abandonment, while Arthur, the principal, had seen only a policy infraction. The guilt, sharp and relentless, tightened in his chest. Evelyn turned from the window, her eyes meeting Arthur's. She saw not judgment, but genuine sorrow and a deep, empathetic understanding. The last of her defenses crumbled. He loved her, you know. His mother. Fiercely, no matter how bad it got. She reached for a small, dusty address book from a nearby side table. "I don't know where he is now." "Haven't for years. But after it all happened, he stayed in a shelter for a while. In Oakland." She flipped through the brittle pages, her finger stopping on a faded entry. "Here, Leo. Shelter Oakland. It's old. Very old. But it's all I have." She handed the book to Arthur, her hand trembling slightly. Arthur's fingers brushed hers, a silent exchange of hope and shared regret. A new spark ignited in his eyes, a tangible lead. A path forward. He had a name, a place, a direction. Arthur Finch sat in his study, the dim glow of his laptop screen illuminating a face etched with dread. Evelyn's words, Oakland shelter, had led him down a rabbit hole of online archives, old news clippings, and digital records. He'd found it. Not just a shelter, but a specific address, a building that had once stood in a working-class neighborhood, now a vacant lot. And then, the headlines. Blurry, pixelated images of smoke, fire engines, and a gaping hole where a home used to be. Asterisked, tragic apartment fire claims life, teen son questioned. The words screamed at him from 2 decades past. Leo's mother. The fire. It wasn't just a sudden move, a quiet disappearance. It was devastation. A neighbor quoted, a police report hinted at circumstances surrounding the incident, implying far more than an accident. Arthur's stomach clenched. He pieced it together, a horrifying mosaic. Leo, just a teenager, accused of accidentally starting the fire, not out of malice, but during one of his mother's episodes. The weight of it was suffocating. His brilliant student, caught in a nightmare no child should ever face. Arthur pushed away from his desk, the old leather chair groaning in protest. He covered his face with trembling hands, the image of young Leo, distraught in his office, flashing before him. Asterisk, Principal Finch, I didn't mean to. He remembered the words now, a quiet whisper that had been drowned out by the rigid pronouncements of the school board. He had dismissed it then as a child's panicked excuse for a minor infraction. How could he have been so blind, so utterly tragically blind? Leo hadn't just been a troubled kid. He had been a boy on the precipice of losing everything, burdened by the crushing weight of his mother's illness and a looming tragedy. Arthur's administrative coldness, his adherence to policy, had been a dereliction of a deeper duty. He, the principal, was supposed to protect his students. He had failed Leo. A brilliant mind, a sensitive soul had been crying out for help, and Arthur, focused on rules, had been deaf. The guilt, a familiar ache for 2 decades, now roared to life, a searing, unbearable pain. The relentless search continued, each click of the mouse revealing another layer of Leo's unimaginable suffering. The fire hadn't been the end of his ordeal. It was merely the beginning of his complete isolation. A few more newspaper fragments, a brief court record, confirmed it. Leo's father, already distant, had vanished completely after the fire. No custody claims, no support, just a clean break from the wreckage of his family. Leo, barely a man, was left an orphan, blamed for a tragedy he couldn't control, abandoned by the very people who should have protected him. Arthur shook his head, a single, unbidden tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. The injustice of it all was a bitter taste in his mouth. A system that failed, a family that fragmented, leaving a bright, hopeful boy to navigate the darkness entirely alone. How many more like Leo were out there, lost to the cracks in the world? He picked up the old copy of Cosmic Wonders, its familiar weight now carrying a profound new significance. He turned to the page, finding the margin note that had first caught his eye. A quote about lost stars, carefully underlined in Leo's looping script. Once it had seemed a poetic musing. Now it was a heartbroken lament. Leo hadn't been talking about distant galaxies. He'd been talking about his lost mother, his vanished father, the brilliant future that had burned away with his home. Arthur's finger trembled as he traced the words, seeing not just a student's insight, but a boy's raw grief, his brilliance overshadowed by a darkness Arthur had been too preoccupied to see. The book was no longer just a clue. It was a tangible piece of Leo's soul, a whisper from a wounded past. Arthur closed the book, the soft thud echoing in the quiet room. The torment of guilt had not lessened, but a new, fierce resolve had taken root. He would not let Leo remain a lost star. He had failed him once, but he would not fail him again. This wasn't just about atoning for a past mistake. It was about reclaiming a piece of humanity he had once neglected. He would find Leo Maxwell. He would offer him the support, the understanding, the kindness he had been denied for so long. Arthur stood, his posture straighter than it had been in years, his face etched with a quiet, unwavering determination. This was no longer an investigation. It was a sacred quest. The Oakland streets blurred into a canvas of forgotten dreams and bustling struggle as Arthur Finch walked. Days bled into one another, each dawn finding him at a new shelter, a different community center, a fresh library. He followed the faint trail left by Evelyn Reed, asking quiet, persistent questions. Do you remember a young man? Intelligent eyes, a bit quiet. Name was Leo Maxwell? Most faces offered blank stares, others a vague shrug. A kind woman at a soup kitchen remembered a young man who sketched constellations on napkins, but couldn't recall his name or where he went. Another at a community clinic spoke of a, quote, reclusive boy who always had a book. But that was years ago. The clues were like dust motes, visible but impossible to grasp. Arthur felt the weariness seep into his bones, but the image of Leo's brilliant, lost mind, the weight of his own past inaction, fueled him. He wouldn't give up. Not now. Not when he was so close to finding the lost star. A week later, Arthur found himself in a part of Oakland he rarely visited. A vibrant, if slightly rough district with splashes of street art and independent shops. Remembering Leo's youthful passion for drawing, he had started visiting small art galleries, a long shot in a city teeming with forgotten talents. As he stepped into a gallery named the Urban Canvas, the scent of oil paint and possibility filled the air. The owner, a woman with vibrant purple hair and kind eyes, was arranging abstract sculptures. Excuse me, Arthur began, his voice hesitant. I'm looking for someone. An artist, perhaps, went by Leo, quiet, very observant. The owner paused, her head cocked. Leo? She mused, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Yeah, a Leo used to bring in small charcoal sketches sometimes. Incredible stuff, really. Stars, nebulae, but with a raw, almost pained energy. Arthur's heart gave a hopeful lurch. You know where I might find him? The owner pointed vaguely towards a side street. Last I heard, he had a studio over in that old building complex, down near the docks. Apartment 3C, I think. A spark ignited in Arthur's chest. A warmth he hadn't felt in years. The address led Arthur to a weathered, 4-story brick building, its windows streaked with grime, a testament to decades of overlooked lives. It was evening, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and terror. After 20 years, after retracing a life through fragmented memories and bureaucratic whispers, he was here. This was it. He looked up, his gaze drawn to a faint yellowish light emanating from a window on the top floor. Apartment 3C. A profound sense of destiny settled over him, heavy and sacred. He took a deep, shaky breath, the cold air filling his lungs, a silent prayer forming on his lips. Please, let it be him. Please, let him be well. His hand, trembling slightly, reached for the worn metal door handle, pushing it open with a soft groan. The air inside was cool, still, and held the faint scent of old paint. Arthur climbed the creaking stairs, each step echoing in the quiet building, amplifying the thrum of his own pulse. He found apartment 3C and raised his hand, knocking gently, then a little firmer. The silence that followed stretched, agonizing. Just as despair began to creep in, the door slowly, cautiously opened. Standing in the dim light was a man. His face was etched with lines that spoke of hardship, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes, those eyes, they were the same intense, intelligent, stormy eyes Arthur remembered from 20 years ago. Older, world-weary, but unmistakably Leo. Leo Maxwell. The name escaped Arthur's lips in a choked whisper, a ghost finally given form. Leo stared back, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and a deep, wary distrust. Time seemed to stop, the cluttered, art-filled studio behind Leo a silent witness to a reunion 2 decades in the making. Leo's eyes, once so full of youthful brilliance, now held a hardened, defensive glaze. He recognized Arthur, that much was clear, and the recognition was not one of warmth. A flicker of something akin to fear, then anger, crossed his face. He began to push the door closed, slowly but firmly, the movement a clear, unspoken dismissal. "Wait!" Arthur cried, his voice thick with emotion, his hand shooting out to gently but resolutely stop the door. He couldn't let him retreat again. Not after all this. "Leo, please. Just a moment of your time. I need to speak with you. It's important. More important than you know." Leo's eyes narrowed. His jaw set. "You're a bit late for important, Principal," he said, his voice rough, unused to conversation, each word a shard of glass. 20 years too late, I'd say. The bitterness was palpable, a wall built from years of pain and abandonment. Arthur felt a fresh wave of guilt, but beneath it, a desperate resolve. He had to break through. Arthur stepped fully into the small, cluttered studio, the scent of turpentine and old coffee mingling in the air. He held the dog-eared copy of Cosmic Wonders like a sacred text. Leo, still frozen in the doorway, watched him with wide, disbelieving eyes, a wary animal caught off guard. The silence stretched, heavy with decades of unspoken words, of lost possibilities. Arthur's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, but he pushed past his own anxiety. He had waited 20 years for this moment. His voice, when it came, was a raspy whisper, thick with the emotion he had held captive for so long. "Leo," he began, his gaze unwavering, "I've come to say, I am profoundly sorry." Arthur bowed his head slightly, a gesture of humility. "I was your principal. I should have done more. I should have seen." Leo's stunned silence shattered. A choked, guttural sound escaped his throat, a raw lament that had been simmering beneath the surface for 2 decades. "Sorry?" he spat, the word laced with venom, his voice rising, cracking with suppressed rage. "Sorry doesn't bring my mother back. Sorry doesn't erase the blame they heaped on me, the whispers, the way everyone looked at me like I was a monster." He gestured wildly around the small room, at the canvases stacked against the walls, the makeshift bed in the corner. "Sorry doesn't pay for a roof or food or the medication my mother needed before the fire. You stood there, Principal Finch, a man of authority, and you let them cast me out. You let them expel me when my entire world was collapsing. You saw a kid with a minor infraction, but you didn't see the fire in my home, the madness in my mother's eyes, the father who abandoned me the moment things got hard. You just let me go. Into nothing. Sorry? What good is sorry now?" Arthur stood motionless, absorbing every word, every shard of pain, letting it pierce him. He deserved it. He deserved every ounce of Leo's bitterness. When Leo finally sagged, exhausted by the outpouring of years of anguish, Arthur took a hesitant step forward. He extended his hands, offering the worn book. "This," Arthur said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "I found this in a clinic waiting room, and I knew it had to be yours." Leo stared at the book in Arthur's hands, then back at Arthur's earnest face. His anger, though still simmering, faltered, replaced by a profound confusion. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he took the book. His fingers brushed the familiar cover, then flipped open to the inside. His gaze fell upon the intricate margin notes, his own youthful script, swirling around the printed text. He saw the questions he'd asked, the insights he'd penned, the vibrant mind he used to be. A tremor ran through his body, a ghost of a memory stirring. Leo's eyes widened, tracing the words, a silent journey back in time. He saw the spark of genius, the boundless curiosity that had once defined him, before the fire, before the blame, before the world collapsed. He looked up at Arthur, his vision blurring. The bitterness, the rage, they were still there, but now they were overshadowed by something else. A profound, aching sorrow for the boy he had been, for the dreams he had lost. A choked sob escaped him, followed by another, and another, until he was weeping openly, uncontrollably, the tears of 20 years finally bursting forth. He sank onto an overturned crate, the book falling open on his lap, his shoulders shaking. Arthur knelt beside him, placing a gentle, comforting hand on Leo's shoulder, a silent anchor in the storm of his grief. Arthur waited, letting Leo weep until the torrent subsided into ragged breaths. When Leo finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but strangely clear, Arthur met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Leo," he said, his voice firm but kind, "I can't undo the past, but I can help with the future. I want to help you, reconnect you with resources, with support, whatever you need to rebuild your life, to find that brilliant young man again." He paused, a silent question hanging in the air. Leo looked at the book in his lap, then back at Arthur. The old principle, once a symbol of his expulsion, now offered a lifeline. After a long moment, a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a word, but it was everything. A silent understanding passed between them, a fragile bridge built over 2 decades of regret. The clatter of ceramic mugs on saucers, the comforting scent of brewing coffee. It was a world away from the sterile clinic and from Leo's cramped studio. Arthur watched Leo across the small diner table, the younger man hunched over a plate of pancakes, eating slowly, almost mechanically. Arthur had insisted on treating him, a simple act of kindness that felt monumental. "You still sketch, Leo?" Arthur asked gently, noticing the subtle way Leo's fingers twitched, as if itching for a pencil. Leo hesitated, then nodded, a faint blush on his worn cheeks. "Sometimes, mostly when the ideas get too loud to ignore." He pushed a half-eaten pancake aside and, with a tentative movement, pulled a crumpled napkin from his pocket. His hands, though calloused, moved with a familiar grace as he began to sketch, a complex pattern of swirling nebulae emerging from the grease-stained paper. Arthur watched, a warm smile spreading across his face. The passion, that brilliant spark, was still there, flickering against the odds. Arthur, a man who once navigated the labyrinthine politics of a high school board, now channeled that formidable energy into a new, more personal mission. Days blurred into a series of phone calls from his quiet study. He leveraged old contacts in social services, reached out to former PTA members involved in community housing initiatives, and even called a retired school psychologist he knew. Yes, a former student. He'd explain patiently, his voice firm with purpose. Brilliant, but fell on hard times, needs a fresh start. Leo, hesitant but no longer entirely resistant, listened on the other end of the line. "They have some options, Leo," Arthur said one evening. A list of affordable studios and therapy programs spread across his desk, a blueprint for a life rebuilt. A place where you can paint. A place where you can heal. After a long silence, Arthur heard a quiet, almost imperceptible, "Okay, Mr. Finch, I'll look at them." It was a tiny step, but to Arthur it felt like the turning of a tide. A few days later, Arthur sat opposite Evelyn Reed in her modest living room, the familiar weight of the Cosmic Wonders book in his lap. "I found him, Evelyn," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "Leo. He's doing all right. He's agreed to get some help." Evelyn's face, usually a canvas of guarded weariness, crumpled with an emotion Arthur hadn't dared hope for. Tears, slow and steady, traced paths through the fine lines around her eyes. She covered her mouth with a trembling hand, a sound escaping her lips that was half sob, half gasp of profound relief. "My Leo," she whispered, the name itself a prayer. Is he willing to see me?" Arthur nodded gently, a quiet understanding passing between them. The lightness in the room was palpable, as if a forgotten window had finally been opened, allowing years of stale air and unspoken grief to escape. A family fractured by tragedy and silence was slowly, tentatively, beginning to reweave its threads. Months melted away, each one adding a new brushstroke to Leo Maxwell's life. His small, sunlit studio apartment, a space Arthur had helped him secure, now hummed with a quiet energy. Canvases, vibrant with cosmic landscapes and intricate star charts, lined the walls, each stroke infused with a hope that had once seemed impossible. Arthur stood in the doorway, a familiar, comforting presence. Leo, his face still etched with the echoes of hardship but softened by peace, was lost in the creation, a brush moving with renewed purpose across a fresh canvas. He glanced up, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. Arthur offered a gentle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the new chapter, a bond forged not just by shared history, but by rediscovered dreams. Later that evening, back in the quiet solitude of his own apartment, Arthur sat by the window. The setting sun cast a warm golden glow across the room, illuminating the worn cover of Cosmic Wonders resting in his hands. It was no longer a symbol of nagging guilt, but a testament to profound pride. He traced the familiar, looping margin notes, each one a whisper of Leo's brilliant mind, now no longer lost. Arthur reflected on the journey, on the uncomfortable confrontations and the quiet persistence. He realized then, with a peaceful, knowing smile, that the true measure of a life wasn't in accolades or achievements, but in the enduring inheritance of kindness, the courage to seek reconnection, and the quiet, extraordinary power of a second chance given and received.